Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Senator Tom Cotton is my guest. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for having me back on.
Now, I always love having you on because you're a member of the Senate Intel Committee, you're a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and you're a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. But today I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the fact that you wrote Sacred Duty, a best-selling book about your time in the Old Guard at Arlington and the history of the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. So I believe you to be the expert available to the media to discuss what happened when President Trump accompanied the families of the fallen at Abbey Gate on Monday. I have not seen you quoted anywhere. Did everyone try and reach you for your informed view of what happened?
No, Hugh, you and I are the first people to discuss it. And I'll say I haven't discussed it with President Trump or his campaign team. But judging by the media reports and also the deep state political hacks that the Biden administration installed at the Pentagon to oversee our uniformed military, rushing off this morning to have a big story anonymously reported in the Washington Post, it seems to me like they did everything to try to prevent President Trump from going with the families of the fallen to Arlington National Cemetery because they didn't want to highlight Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's disgraceful failures in Afghanistan. Again, based on the reporting I've seen, this was not Donald Trump's idea. This was not the campaign's idea. This was a request by families of some of the 13 brave Americans who were killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago this week because of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's inept failure to plan for the orderly withdrawal of Afghanistan. Families, whom I would mention, have never gotten so much as a phone call, much less a meeting with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. So President Trump, of course, accepted their invitation to come commemorate the loss of their children or their parents, their husbands, their wives, and to celebrate their service and their sacrifice for this nation. You can see for yourself from the photos and videos that are online, this is not a campaign event. He wasn't wearing a red MAGA hats. People weren't flying Trump banners around him. They were peacefully and respectfully and in a dignified fashion honoring the service and the sacrifice of those fallen heroes and their loved ones. But you had, again, according to the Washington Post, senior DOD officials who spent weeks planning on how to handle this event and then apparently caused a scene at the site and now are using the company town broadsheet, the Washington Post, to try to gin up yet another controversy or scandal around Donald Trump. Hugh, here's what the scandal is. It's not Donald Trump honoring the sacrifice of those 13 fallen heroes and their families. It's Kamala Harris and Joe Biden sending them into a situation that was needlessly dangerous, chaotic, and hectic to the point where they were killed by a suicide bomber, and then not even having the decency to ever call their families to thank them for their service and express their condolences. That's the real scandal, Hugh.
Now, Senator, I have not revealed this yet until this moment. I know the Gold Star families from Abbey Gates organizer. I know the individual that they have hired to help them tell their stories. And I was invited by that individual to go on Monday, and I would gladly have gone, but I'm not there. I'm up north. And so I replied, thank you. I'm deeply honored, because I was honored to be invited by the families, but I couldn't go. I would like, again, you may have to remind people who are new listeners or new affiliates what the Old Guard is and what your service with it is, because then I have a question about photography at Arlington, but I want the audience to know you actually know what you're talking about when you talk about Arlington National Cemetery. Can you explain why?
Sure, Hugh. So the Old Guard is the 3rd Infantry, the oldest active duty regiment in the Army. It's stationed at Fort Myer, which is adjacent to Arlington, separated by just a small stone wall. And they perform the military honor funerals for Army veterans in the cemetery. Now, there are other similar units for all the services. The Army is by far the largest just because it's the largest service and had the largest number of personnel serving in our nation's wars throughout history. But they perform funerals in there 5 days a week, almost every day of the year. The rules on photography, as you can see, Hugh, just by going online and, say, Googling Joe Biden, Section 60 Arlington, and clicking on images, are pretty relaxed. There's all kinds of images of Joe Biden walking around in Section 60. Or for that matter, go to Arlington National Cemetery's or the Old Guard's own social media pages. They have beautiful moving pictures of soldiers, the caisson, the incredible scenery inside the cemetery, the monuments and memorials, the leaves changing in the fall, snow falling in the winter. These are all beautiful, wonderful images. And it's very common today for families to want to have photographs and video of their own funerals. Not so much when I was serving there in 2007 and 2008, but with the ubiquitous rise of smartphones and cameras, people increasingly have their own videographers there. You can see photos that are very moving of Gold Star parents and widows in Section 60 visiting the gravesite of their loved ones. The only rule against photography or videos of which I'm aware and that we on occasion had to enforce, Hugh, is when onlookers or bystanders wanted to capture images of a funeral that had not been cleared by the family in advance. And they don't mean disrespect you. They don't mean to intrude on the family's privacy. They just don't know better. I mean, if you're one of thousands and thousands of people who visit the cemetery every single day and you're there to see the sites, to go to Section 60, to go to the tomb, to visit Joe Lewis's grave, to visit Blackjack Pershing's grave, and all of a sudden you hear the clickety-clack of those horseshoes and you turn around and there's a caisson and there's soldiers marching, then many people understandably would want to capture those images. But out to respect the dignity and the privacy of the ceremony, the Old Guard in Arlington will have a handful of people who aren't marching or performing the funeral that will politely and in a quiet fashion ask them not to take those photographs. Of course, they always comply. Again, they didn't know any better. That's the only rule of which I'm aware.
And I must tell you, if there's a rule, I've broken it many times. For example, my friend Jan Janura, who runs the Wild Adventure, his father is buried at Arlington. And I promised him the next time I go, I will find Mr. Janura's resting place, and I will take a photo of that. My wife's grandfather and grandmother are there, and we've taken photographs of that. No one has ever said a word to us, and I'm especially amazed. This is a media critique. You were in the Old Guard. I don't know if anyone else in Congress was in the Old Guard. I don't know if anyone in the media was in the Old Guard. How do they not know to call you to ask you, or do they know and don't want your opinion?
Well, I think they know that I'll point out that it seems to me, but again, based on all the published reports, that it's the civilian political hacks that have been installed in Lloyd Austin's office and installed in the office of Christine Wormuth, the Secretary of the Army, who's been a terrible disaster in that position, who have tried to gin up this controversy and who have, in fact, in advance, try to create made-up rules, such as the rule that, you can't take photographs in Section 60, unlike every single other section of the cemetery. Again, Hugh, just go on the Internet and Google Section 60 and click on images, and you'll see thousands and thousands of images. And, yeah, like you, Hugh, I do it as well. I happen to be in Washington pretty regularly because I'm in the U.S. Senate, and I know several people, either with whom I served or whose families I've gotten to know through my service in the Senate. And if I'm in town and can do so, I'll go to Arlington on the anniversary of their death, and I'll take a photograph of their headstone, which has almost always been marked with coins or photographs or beer bottles or flags by friends who visited earlier in the day or just people who pass by and notice the date, and I'll send it to them. Again, this is not something that is a long-standing, pre-existing rule of which the Trump campaign should have been aware. I think this is a controversy that has been ginned up on purpose by the civilian political hacks acting as apparatchiks inside the Department of Defense because they want to distract attention away from Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's disastrous failures in Afghanistan and lack of decency and even calling those grieving parents and family members to express their condolences and what they should express, which is their regrets and apologies.
Now, Senator, I have the same theory about the National Archives and the Mar-a-Lago documents case, that was ginned up by low-level or high-level bureaucrats at the archives. I know the archives probably as well as any agency besides OPM, which I ran, but I know the archives, and they're full of political hacks. And someone started a controversy And this is the cartel of media and Democrat power brokers and big money in this country, which I think we're going to throw out. Now, let me go to Dana Bash. I have confidence in Dana because I worked with her on 4 debates. I recommended her to the RNC. I have great confidence in her asking commander-in-chief questions tonight, such as, does Israel have the right to do what they did over the weekend with Hezbollah? And if the answer is yes, can they do it to Iran? I have great faith in her. Do you?
Hugh, I think she's going to be under great pressure from CNN, which depends on its viewers, to go soft on Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Even if she wants to be tough but fair, Hugh, there's too many things to press Kamala Harris on. There's too many far-left positions she's taken, so she can only scratch the surface. But, in the end, we don't need Dana Bash to ask tough questions. We don't even need Kamala Harris to do this interview. We know where she stands. She's been vice president and has a failed record for 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration. She was in the Senate for 4 years, and she was the most liberal senator. And she said what she believed when she ran for president in 2020. The American people know where she stands.
Well, there are two things on which we don't know that. One, I'd like to hear her say whether or not she supports expanding the Supreme Court, which is a statutory action. It's radical. It's revolutionary. It will destroy the rule of law. And I'd like her on tape answering that. And then I have no idea what she thinks about fracking today. She was way against it 4 years ago, but it's all muddied up now. So do you think we'll get those two questions, the expansion of the Supreme Court and fracking at least?
Those would be two good questions, Hugh. And again, we don't need the questions, though. We know where she stands. She has said so in her own voice on camera. And when she was a 54-year-old woman running for president. These are not youthful opinions expressed in high school op-ed.
Good point.
That one might reasonably say, like, yeah, I wish I'd left that unsaid when I was 17 years old in high school. She said all these things when she was serving in the United States Senate seeking the presidency. So we don't really need to hear what Dana Bash has to say tonight or what Kamala Harris said in response. The American people know that Kamala Harris is a dyed-in-the-wool San Francisco liberal.
And dangerously so. I think she's the most radical major party nominee in our modern history. Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you for the background. And if reporters are out there, do your jobs and call the one person in the government who actually knows how Arlington works from the inside. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America.